The story of the Tyhee ward is a story of unyielding faith and fortitude. Friends and families cared for each other while forging a life on what was affectionately called the Tyhee Flats. In the beginning, the saints met in a one-room building west of Tyhee Elementary. Curtains could be pulled to divide the building into different classes. Purchased from the Associated Farm Group, it not only served the ward members for many years, but it also served the community. Dances and gatherings, as well as school, was held there until the early 20s when the Tyhee School was built.
Grandma was called to be the Relief Society president during the epidemic of 1918. And they had sickness on the whole flat. It didn't matter the color of skin, that Indians were sick, white people were sick. And there was a lady, she was an Indian lady, and Andrew Cutler had married her. And she and Grandma would get together, load a wagon for needs of things, and Aunt Rose would go with them. Aunt Rose had been a kind of a little bit older teenager, and the three of them would head out through the flat treating people who were sick. And it didn't matter who they were. If they were sick, they got treated.
In 1934, when the building inspector met Sam Dunn, he had nothing but bad news. It was no longer safe to congregate there. Bishop Dunn began to protest, but as the inspector leaned against the doorframe, both the wall and the ceiling moved. Dunn had lost his case. There was no convincing him to relent. Much to the bishop's relief, the Tyhee School Board agreed to let the congregation temporarily meet in the school, but only for 6 months. There was only one solution. They needed a new building. The problem was, there were several problems. At the time, the church had specifications for acquiring a new building. One of those requirements was that members pay for their building. This was a problem. Although members were long on ability and dedication, they were short on cash. These concerns didn't stop Bishop Dunn. He knew he just needed to find a solution. Bishop Dunn wasn't your typical person. Creative solutions were his forte. For years he had been holding his bishopric meetings with Henry Jensen and Arden Hale to and from his favorite fishing holes. He was used to having the unusual work, so off he went to meet with the presiding bishopric who oversaw the building of new churches. His meeting did not go well. Disappointed, Sam left with, "You can't have a building, you don't have 3 bids, and you don't have the required money." 2 times he would travel to Salt Lake City only to be sent home empty-handed. The 3rd time, Sam entered his meeting ready for a fight. He had 3 bids and an estimation of the cost to build, as well as a conviction not to be turned away. Again he met with John Wells, a counselor in the presiding bishopric. Somewhat impatiently and quite firmly, for the 3rd time, Bishop Wells escorted Sam from his office and told him he couldn't give him any help with his problem. Sam sat on the couch in the hall and firmly declared he wasn't leaving until he could talk to someone who could help him. That someone was Heber J. Grant, president of the church. Sam's interview was very similar to the 3 previous. Sam explained that they were a people short on cash, but not a people short on ability and determination. In response to President Grant's inquiry as to what if they couldn't get it built for the estimated cost, Sam handed President Grant the deed to his farm. President Grant was touched by the faith that Bishop Dunn had in his people. They could build their building. And build their building they did. The canal water dried up in early July, freeing men from their typical summer work. They spent that extra time working on the church. Not just members of the LDS faith participated. Building the church was a community event. They hired a general contractor, Victor Allen, who showed them what to do. Ed Stewart hauled gravel and was involved in the building of the roof and the flooring. Jewel Hardin did the cement work. Taking advantage of a 20% discount, Henry Jensen and his wife made several trips to Burley to get the bricks for the outside of the building. Each time they had to load the bricks and unload them, a physically demanding job. Others built, roofed, and painted. The priest quorum was responsible for the roof. At one point, the building overseer noticed the shingles weren't just right. The priests took them off and started again. Alma Pratt, nephew to Parley P. Pratt, did the plastering while the Relief Society took responsibility for painting the building. For many, this was the first time they'd done some of the tasks they'd been assigned. Later in life, Sam Dunn, the bishop of the 7th Ward, commented on the situation.
But I don't know if the people here had, and the whole community, not just Mormon people, but the other people too here. Well, they all had some sweat into that building.
My parents came to Tyhee in 1919 and settled on a farm, because my dad always wanted to be a farmer, but it wasn't a really good farm, and they had frozen-in crops, and they had a hard time irrigating because they were on a hill, and the water would run off the crops downhill. So in 1934, when they built the church on the corner of Yellowstone and Tyhee, it was all volunteer help, and he got to build the cabinets in the library and the kitchen, and he turned to liking carpentry better than farming. So he followed that line.
Everybody in Tyhee was friends, and of course the church was the big entertainment place, because we didn't go clear to Pocatello very often because that was too far and too expensive. They had movies once in a while, and we had never seen a movie before, and at the end of it you could hear the flop of the film.
My dad had a dog named Jigs. He loved this dog, and in the winter he would he would rope the dog to a sled, and he would ride the sled all the way to the church on the corner of Tyhee. It was about 4 miles, and watch the 10-cent movies. And then he would ride the dog home I think it was every Saturday. Yeah. And he loved that church. He has very fond memories. Even though he was a Catholic boy, he loved that church.
As the building finished completion, it came time to furnish the building. Sam Dunn, Arden Hale, and Pearl Ashton, who was going for a day to visit her family in Salt Lake, headed off early. Benches, a table for the sacrament, a pulpit, a desk, chairs, and other furnishings were loaded onto a 10-foot truck bed. The load was so full the desk was tied to the top of the cab. They started for home about 5 p.m. It was December and already getting dark. Sam records, Pearl, Arden, and I sat in the front seat of the truck and pulled out of the alley where we were loaded. I went to take a left turn, and the darn truck went straight ahead. The weight in the back was keeping the front tires from touching the road. They needed some weight on the front. Sam recounts, on the side of the road close by, they were replacing some cement curbing. There was a piece of cement about 5 foot long and weighed maybe about 350 pounds. We rolled it over to the truck and got a couple of 2x4s and stuck it along the bumper. We wired the cement there to balance the truck. Things went well until they started up Sardine Canyon. It was about 10 p.m. and starting to blizzard. Unable to see very far ahead, and with a 150-foot drop on one side of them, they crept along. They had no traction, so Arden got out and stood on the cement bumper while Pearl kept the windshield clear of ice by leaning out the window. Sam just kept going. They finally made it through the canyon, getting to Wells about 11 p.m. They still had 430 miles to go. Meanwhile, at home, Richard Ward had a feeling the bishop was in trouble. He got the high priest group together and held a prayer meeting for their safety. The weather broke about Preston, and they got home about 6 a.m. When it came time for the dedication, President Grant came personally. According to Bishop Dunn's notes, he told him this was the fastest the church building had ever been constructed. The members of the 7th Ward would enjoy their building for many years. For some families, generations would live within its boundaries.
We have 4 generations of the Stewarts that have actually been in the 7th Ward.
Besides having a place to worship, they'd enjoy fellowship with each other and experience the joy that comes from a growing testimony of Jesus Christ.
We had an irrigation canal went across our farm. It wasn't very deep. Going at it was about waist deep, but I learned to swim in that canal. But when I was baptized, my father was in the bishopric. We went to church on Sunday morning and to Sunday school, and went home and went up to the canal, and Dad baptized me, and then I was confirmed in sacrament meeting in the evening.
In the 40s that they had ward campouts up on the Buffalo River in Island Park in August.
Back in the old days, when people went on a mission, it was a big deal. And everybody really supported that person. And Maple Hill was one of the very, very few in the Tyhee area that went on a mission back then. It was inspiration for the whole Tyhee area.
I think the greatest testimony builder probably was when you'd see people who hadn't been active and they became active. And we had a great opportunity to see some go to the temple and be sealed.
My grandpa was part of the co-op out there, the original co-op, and he was Catholic, but he never, according to my dad, never felt excluded because it was a bunch of Mormons and this Catholic man, and that's how my dad felt too. Those people just had a profound influence on my dad just because of the way they were. My dad had some vices that he had to get over. And he stopped smoking before I was born. He stopped drinking the summer of '85. And then slowly his heart just softened. And these people continued to stay in his life. Actually, a man by the last name of Anderson, Brother Anderson, was his home teacher. He was the man who lost his arm in a farm accident. His son is Neil Anderson, the elder. But my dad, even though he wasn't a member, he would sit and listen to them. I remember him saying, "Hide the beer, the home teachers are coming." But he would sit and listen to Brother Anderson, his home teacher. His heart just eventually softened. He got really involved with church history, and Brigham Young was a big influence on his conversion. And when he was 80 years old, he was baptized. But the cool thing about that is at his baptism, there was these people that had a profound influence. I can't express my gratitude for the men and women who were such a big part of our lives and influenced the conversion in my dad's life.
The missionaries, we had an allocation of 2 a year, if I remember right. 2 a year could be sent because of military problems, and some of the wards in town didn't have enough youth that they needed their allocation, so we'd usually try to get President Richards to let us borrow one. Ted Lowe was one who the Elders Quorum sent. That was before I was bishop. I was one. We used to have a calf project, and we'd put a calf or two in a pasture. For everybody that had a pasture, they had 1 or 2 of our calves, and we'd put them in the spring and pick them up in the fall. And we always had a little money, and so at one time we had 2 missionaries out. And if we wanted to have a party, we had a little money.
We had large family Thanksgiving dinners together. They took place at the Tyhee Church when I was growing up. We had big dinner, family program, and always ended with a dance. It was something that we all looked forward to, and it kept us connected as a family.
When I taught Relief Society, I always gave them a mint, because I told them it was worth a mint to them to know what I was going to tell them that day.
My grandfather died when my dad was in his first year of college, and my grandfather died of pneumonia, and so my father had to come home from college and help my grandmother run the farm and also help her raise the children. And my grandmother moved to a home across from the old Tyhee Chapel there on the corner of Yellowstone and Tyhee. And she became the custodian of that building. And there was each one of As we grew up as children, I came from a family of 6 of us. Each one of us took our turns helping Grandma clean the church.
Put on road shows, and we would do it at 3 buildings. We'd go to Fort Hall first, and then to Ingham, and then come back to the 7th Ward building and put it on.
The Relief Society had their own funding. They weren't under the direction of the bishop. It was their own money. Right. So they would have bazaars and sell all of the handmade things that they had made. And one of the things that they did not have in the Relief Society room was a piano. And so during the time that my grandma was the president, they earned enough money to buy a piano for the Relief Society room.
There was a 4th of July pit barbecue. The pit was probably as large as a pickup truck, lined with bricks, and for a couple of days ahead of time they would take truckloads of wood and burn it down and heat the bricks in the ground, and then they would put, in essence, a whole beef down into the pit and close it off and cook it usually overnight for the barbecue that would happen on the 4th of July.
But what happened was the tractor exploded and my dad started on fire. And you know that how they tell kids that you should drop and roll. Well, when you roll in stubble, it follows you. And so he knew that, and he fell to his knees and he said, "God help me." And he said he looked down and there wasn't even a spark left on his body. It was totally gone. And I do believe that the Lord saved him. He had a long road of healing, and it happened at a really bad time of the year when the harvest, the sugar beets, and the hay needed to be brought in, and the ward called for a George Facer Day. And I remember all these great big farm equipment pulling into the yard, and all these farmers coming in with the potato toppers and the beet diggers and everything that they had, and they just set to work that day. And I remember the Relief Society coming and setting up tables out in the yard and to feed all those farmers that day. It was quite an amazing time. And there would be people that would just show up and help my brothers turn the water in the field. And the farmers would just turn up and help, and then they'd go home and take care of their own stuff. And they made sure that our family got in the crops that year, that we got a good price on stuff, and that the farm didn't fail. And without them, our family wouldn't have made it.
Perhaps it is not unusual to look upon childhood through the tint of rose-colored glasses. However, through the years I have reflected upon my youth, I believe I had the opportunity to grow up in one of the very best places on the earth. Living in Tyhee and being nurtured in the environment there we shared was a wonderful blessing. The special community was filled with people who exemplified character traits for youth and children to look up to and strive for. The challenges and joys we shared united us. During my youth, I was blessed to have the opportunity to participate in road shows, speech and dance festivals, and all of the special celebrations in Tyhee. I will always treasure the memories of ward dinners using the dumbwaiter and the old Tyhee building, washing dishes beside the older people, enjoying their company and conversation. Golden green balls were special occasions. I learned to dance by dancing with all of the wonderful men I respected in our ward. The 4th of July celebration in Tyhee was always the best. The pit-cooked roast was delicious. Our ward auctions were wonderful events. I realize now that I had no idea then how much work went into the preparation for these events. I will be eternally grateful for the sacrifices of so many people. The examples set by my leaders and ward members provided a fertile seedbed for my testimony to sprout and grow. One of the greatest blessings to the youth of Tyhee was the monthly fireside or bishop discussion that was held on Sunday evenings. On these special occasions, we often heard faith-promoting experiences and testimonies. like that of Brother George Davis, who testified that he had been healed after a priesthood blessing. We witnessed the tragedy that Brother George Facer experienced when he was so badly burned. Then seeing the community step up to care for and harvest his crops that year was a great lesson to me. Bishop Loveland served faithfully through many challenges. I am grateful that we saw and heard these dear people share their testimony through these trials. Often our evenings ended in a testimony meeting. It was great to experience and hear the peers and those older than me share their testimonies. As word spread of our great fireside, attendance increased. There were few homes that had enough space to accommodate all who wanted to attend. And of course, we always had some special refreshments at the conclusion. We had a wonderful, cohesive group in Tyhee. I always felt I had a large support group surrounding me. If you were from Tyhee, you were part of that group. You know, I really don't think I am looking through rose-colored glasses. I spent my childhood in Tyhee, a corner of heaven on the earth.
Mainly where I saw my role models was in service. And one of the service projects they always did was the 4th of July float. And they would do the float over at Lowell Hales Dairy. And that's where I saw the men that I admired and their skills. They had the machinists, they had the carpenters, and they had the mechanics, and they all worked every night over there to put that float together.
As membership increased, so did the need for more room, so more buildings were built. Members donated their time as they came and helped build. Besides giving their labor, extensive sacrifices were made to obtain the money necessary for the buildings to be completed.
One thing that I remember about the time when they were building a new church house out on Yellowstone, north of Reservation Road, the church had to raise much of the money for the building fund, and a ward auction was held every year. And as part of these auctions, sometimes quilts or even cakes would be purchased and then redonated back and sold again. Particularly a quilt that a man bought for over $1,000 was then turned back again and resold.
We had to get a little money gathered up to get the ward in a little better financial condition, and so we sent a letter to everybody and told them what we thought their share ought to be. About 2 days later, a sister by the name of Dot Palmer stopped by my house. And she said, "Bishop, do you realize that Grant isn't a member of the church?" And I said, "Oh, of course, I know he's not a member." She said, "Well, don't you think that letter that I got asking for $60 is a little high?" And I said, "Well, Sister Palmer, this might be the only time in your life you can be grateful that he's not a member, because if he was a member, your assessment would have been $120. And she said, "That's about how much sympathy I thought I'd get." And then she smiled, and I said, "Well, while you're here, we ought to visit a little about you paying some tithing." She was a clerk down at the Kennedy grocery, and I knew she hadn't been paying tithing, so I asked if she didn't think she ought to pay a little. She just smiled, and she left, and it wasn't too long until she started paying a little tithing. And it was 7 years later when we decided to build a chapel that we had to raise quite a bit of money for the chapel. 30% was our share. And so we decided that, we as a bishopric decided that we better send a letter out to everybody and ask for what we thought we needed. So we asked every family to pay $1,000 sometime during the next year. And hopefully in a year we could start the building, and by the time it was finished we'd have it paid for. Never heard a word from Dot Palmer. A few weeks later she paid $500. A few months later she paid the other $500. Never did hear a word from her.
First, they helped build the Alameda Stake Center, then the North Stake Center. After that, the Yellowstone building on the old highway, and finally the Tyhee Stake Center. Each of these building projects increased people's opportunity to sacrifice and to gain a testimony of the fact that the Lord was involved in their lives.
living in Tyhee, we were part of 3 steakhouse building projects and raising funds, and then we're only in the third one to be dedicated. The steak would be divided before the building was dedicated, and we'd be in another building project.
One experience of particular note happened when the North Steak Center was being built. For several evenings they had been trying to pack the gravel for the floor using a hose. It wasn't working very well. One day a gentleman came by. He told them they needed to flood the area with a lot more water than they'd been using. He walked them through the process. The next morning workers expected him to return. When he did not show up, everyone began asking each other who he was. It turned out no one knew him, and he was never seen again. Miracles like these augmented the faith of the members of the Tyhee 7th Ward, but it didn't make their faith. Their own actions and their trust in the atonement brought the blessings of conversion. And so, celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Tyhee Ward means taking note that hundreds of weddings, baptisms, and ordinations were performed. It means recognizing that hundreds of lessons were taught and hundreds of testimonies were born. It means ordinary people placed their faith in their Heavenly Father and sacrificed to make life better, not just for themselves, but also for others. And as the Tyhee 7th Ward continues this legacy, ordinary people will change into something extraordinary, sons and daughters of a Heavenly Father who can be counted on to continue the legacy laid by many with unyielding faith and fortitude.